Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Gyanamurtim Nandaititam Gagana Sadrisham Tattvama Shadi Laksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadi Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tanamami. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. We salute the leader of our souls, through whose grace our ignorance is dispelled, who is beyond good and bad, pleasure and pain, life and death, and all other pairs of opposites. We recognize that one as the only witness to the changing phenomena of this universe. May we, through that grace, go beyond darkness and delusion and realize the truth in this very life. Om, peace, peace, peace. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukti Resha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sagalam Chikadcha Akanda Rupa Stiti Areva Moksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings in the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om, peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvovahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu Mahai. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. This afternoon we meet in the fourth of a series of classes which we are entitling Advaita Yoga, or Gaudapada's non-touch yoga. There are, of course, many yogas there, and I started out the first class 4 weeks ago with a new chart with a list of all of those yogas on it, all the main yogas that we know, which are 4 basic main yogas. There's the yoga of wisdom, there's the yoga of devotion, there's the yoga of meditation, and there's the yoga of action. Those 4 yogas are approved by all sampradayas, by all the darshanas, by all the seers, by all the rishis. And then there are other forms of yoga that range from as subtle and non-dual as Sparsha yoga, which is what we're calling non-touch yoga, all the way down to the physical yoga called hatha, everything in between. Even the Bhagavad Gita, if you've read it, has 18 chapters, and each of those chapters is named after a different yoga. There's even the first chapter, ironically enough, is a yoga for depression. Arjuna Vishada Yoga it's called, so that you can actually be one with things that you don't like very much at all, which are a waste of time and which are full of pain. Because Lord Buddha's First Noble Truth is, of course, there is suffering. So we know that to have a sort of wake-up call in this world, we'll see suffering, we'll encounter suffering, we'll suffer ourselves, and we'll see our loved ones suffer, basically in 6 forms: birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. Those are the 6 transformations which may as well be suffering. And you suffer them in accord with 5 elements, don't you? Earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Those are the 5 elements that are your 5 desires. You wanted somewhere solid, so you created earth, and you wanted liquids to drink and swim in and so forth, so you created water. And fire and air and ether, all of those are projections of your own mind and the collective mind and the cosmic mind. What would water look like as a thought? What would fire look like as a thought? What would earth look like as a thought? And you'd have to go to the cosmic mind of Lord Brahma to find that out and see how everything manifests from that thought. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In other words, it all comes out of an origin called the Word. Or if you want to put it more simply, thought is father to the deed. First we think a thing, and then we go out and act, and of course there has to be a playground or a foundation upon which we act. And here in the physical world, that's the 5 elements. Rearranging and permutating in different combinations. Like if you take an object, there's probably more earth in it than water. But there's a little water there, and of course there's potential for fire there, and there's air in it, and it's probably saturated with ether. The space runs through everything. It's one of the beautiful things to meditate on if you want to take the elements from meditations. You do, you sit in the 60s, you sat and looked at a candle flame for a long time. Candle flame in a windless place. And therefore you had the idea of stillness and your mind focused, and you got your first deep meditation on what's called an alambana. The father of yoga calls it the foundation for meditation. And you connected that alambana up with your senses. Fire goes with sight, doesn't it? And air goes with aroma, with the smell, sense of smell, and earth with taste. The other way around, earth with smell and water with taste. And then air with touch and ether with hearing. So you connect the 5 elements up with your 5 senses. When you do that, you have your first step inward, Father of Yoga says. Most beings leave those disconnected. 5 elements are somewhere outside of me. My 5 senses are somewhere here in my body. Zip, that's it, no connection. But to make a connection, spiritually speaking, philosophically speaking, mentally speaking, and physically speaking, all 3. Might as well throw emotionally speaking in there too, because people get very emotional around the earth and the elements and so forth. So it's your first step inward when you actually think in terms of connection. A connection means, I think all of this has come out of me. It wasn't created by God. All of this is a projection of my own mind. That's almost a rule of thumb in Indian philosophy, is that they don't believe in a God that creates or destroys. Everything is eternal. It just goes through surfacing and rising. It goes through projection and withdrawal, solidifying and desolidifying, all coming up and out of the ocean of consciousness, just like waves are doing out there in our Ganga Pacifica, you see outside of our door. So when you begin to learn these yogic precepts, then you're on your way towards the ability to hands off everything. So first you make the connections all the way into the cosmic mind, and then you're a candidate for a Sparsha Yoga, non-touch. Then you find something that the senses cannot relate to you. The senses cannot reveal for you. On the way you find out that you have subtle senses too in dream. Your senses are useful somewhere else besides just here in the head, you see, in the physical head. That means you're going to transcend the brain. You're going to go into what's called the great mind. And this is all an inward journey that intrepid spiritual travelers make. You see, it's a part of their spiritual life. They revisit all of these stations which they saw before they came into the body, and which they will see again when they leave the body. Christ called it the kingdoms of heavens within. You find these lokas, or these realms, inside of you. And when you make those connections, it's obvious what's going on. But here in the physical world, with all the disconnect that's going on, it's not obvious to people. They have not the slightest idea of where they came from, or who they are, or what the purpose for the world is. They think it's for pleasure, or some, as I say, think it's for pain, for enacting violence, or enacting activities that with a good intention and so forth. So the real meaning of it all remains unknown to them because they haven't seen the connections between things. So when you connect everything inside of yourself, then you see this great being Gaudapada. Showed this chart again, to the live streaming audience. Welcome to the live streaming audience, by the way, from different points of the world who are looking in. Some of my students as far away as India and East Coast and West Coast, welcome. And to all the ashramites here and the guests here and students of SRV associations who have joined us today. On the very first class we showed this Gaudapada's non-touch yoga, and I'm revisiting it here in the fourth class just to give you a sort of review of what we've been talking about. Basically it's called Advaita. Advaita will be the future religion of mankind, there's no doubt about that. That's a quote by Vivekananda. And then he qualified it later by saying it's just a matter of which form of Advaita will take the upper hand in any given period of time. Because he said there are different forms of Advaita struggling for existence and for superiority. But as far as Gaudapada is concerned, as far as contemporary times are concerned, a Sparsha yoga, a non-duality, a non-touch yoga is it. There can be no argument against it. There can be no deviating from it once you have opened your third eye and you want to know the truth. If your eye's been made single and you want to know the truth, then you will make use of not only the gross senses and the subtle senses, but some very causal senses that you have too, like a third eye or an inner ear. When you hear Om, or when you see the light of Brahman, those will happen to you in various states, hopefully in meditation, but maybe in dream, or maybe in psychic vision. There are various ways in which this can come upon you, and open your eyes to the reality. So Gaudapada, when I said contemporary, he lived probably 500-600 years after Christ. That's recent to India. See, because India stretches back many, many millennia before Christ. Buddha himself was 550 years before Christ. The Tirthankaras of Jainism stretched back even before Buddha. The 24th was Mahavir, and he was 150 years before Buddha lived. So you can see this. If they had 24 Tirthankaras, that's sort of like their avatars, that's a long ways back before Lord Buddha, isn't it? So you can begin to see how you can carbon date, if you will, India and India's philosophies. It's like the rings of a tree. You cut it down and count the rings, right? And you see how many centuries it's been around or how many decades. Well, you can sort of cut into some of this philosophy, this great forest of Indian philosophy, yoga, Vedanta, Tantra, Samkhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Tantricism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, Ganapatism, on and on. Many, many books, many, many seers, not just one Bible and one divine descent, but dozens and hundreds, stretching back. The mother of all religions, they call her. So Vedanta comes out of that, and trace that as its heritage, back to the mother of all religions. So if you can carbon date it that way, then you see that you're going back a long, long ways, and that Gaudapada in 500 a mere 500 AD is very contemporary and very recent. His student was called Shankara. It's a name that most people who have studied Indian philosophy know about. Adi Shankaracharya, sometimes if you want to give him the highest respect, was the author of scripture and a manifestation of Lord Shiva around 700 AD. So that whole lineage, from Gaudapada to Govindapada to Shankara, who lived in that period, followed this non-touch yoga. Gaudapada called it Asparsha Yoga. But, wonder of wonders, they also worshipped Shiva. They also were devotees of the Divine Mother. So they were a school that merged the Advaita Vedanta with Tantra. So that's a very rich blend. You see, other rich blends we can think about, maybe to give us an example, are Tibetan Buddhism, Dalai Lama and Karmapa and Kalu Rinpoche was around in Hawaii until he passed recently. So we have that Tibetan Buddhist religion is a rich blend of yoga, Tantra, Bon religion of Tibet, see, and some healthy Buddhism thrown in to boot, you see. So we had a real amalgam there, a real hybrid. Some hybrids work perfectly, other hybrids don't work, they don't last, but that's really the test of time when something lasts so long. So here we are sitting here, a mere 1500 years after Gaudapada lived, but many, many millennia after Krishna taught on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And more millennia has passed since then, since Sri Ram and Sita were here with Hanuman. And Vasishta was teaching the young avatar, the teenage avatar to be. So this sweep of time might as well be a second, you see. In fact, it is a second. We call it the eternal moment. Mm-hmm. The passage of time, as I just chanted, space, 5 levels of space, and people, human beings. This is all Brahman we're talking about. And to remain in constant recognition of that is called enlightenment. So if you have a question, what is enlightenment? Don't just ask it over and over again. Answer it. It's living in constant recognition of the fact that all this is Brahman is enlightenment. Now, come and claim your prize, you see. The only problem is you can't touch it. See, it's non-touch. When you have that kind of realization, it's so lofty, you're going to have to take a precipitous ascent to get there, you see. You're going to have to go on a journey into the highest climbs of your own consciousness. You're going to be climbing your own consciousness, you see. I mean, it's put nicely in some of the wisdom songs, for instance. If you sing, Manas Chakshuradir Vimuktaha Svayamya Manas Chakshuradir Manas Chakshuradihi Manas Chakshuradir Agamya Swarupaha Sanitshopalabdis Swarupam Atman. Even when you are bereft of sense experience and you have no mental cognition and your vital functions are gone, that internal reality still continues to exist. It relies upon nothing. It is that which animates the senses, impels the life force, and awakens the mind. That perpetual being am I, self-effulgent, illuminating everything. One of the verses out of the Hastamalaka Stotram, see, Hastamalaka was one of Shankara's devotees, who was the student of Govindapada. See, so you can see this began to stretch out into time. And you had it going in a line of succession called Guru Parampara. Guru passed it to students, and students became gurus and passed it to those students. They spread the message of the non-touch yoga for the last 1500 years or so, down to our own present time. And Gaudapada is famous for that Karika on the Mandukya Upanishad. Mandukya Upanishad is all of 12 slokas long. You can read it in 2 minutes. It's a scripture you can read in 2 or 3 minutes. Of course, the implications there, you want to take 2 or 3 lifetimes to meditate on, or more, because it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's pretty much all about the word. He likes to use this beautiful philosophy that if you want to just cut to the chase, then meditate on the word, Om. It's spelled A-U-M. And A is your waking state, and U is your dreaming state, and M is your deep sleep state. Now those are 3 states of consciousness you have. And you begin to lose touch with your senses. That's why it's called non-touch yoga, you see. In waking state, you have touch with your senses, unless you have the mastery over them. You get my gist? That is, image on the wall there is Sri Krishna driving a chariot pulled by 5 white horses. So the 5 white horses are your senses. And the reins are prana, you see. And then you have the charioteer himself, the will of the chariot, you see. And then you have the Lord looking on, Krishna and Arjuna. So to control the mind and senses is the great yogic feat. If you can do that, then you can transcend your senses while you're in the body. You can first control them, then you can transcend them. And they're not a problem to you anymore. So non-touch yoga is applicable here and now. It's not like Brahman can't be realized by the mind. It can't be realized by the impure mind. But the pure mind and pure senses, they see nothing but Brahman everywhere. Didn't we just chant that? So where are the defects in my senses? Well, the first defect is that they're always outward going. I never tried to turn them inside. So when I hear Gaudapada say non-touch, I think, oh, maybe I should give up touching things outside, and I should begin to find out the meaning of the sense of touch. Find out the meaning of the sense of sight. Everything is fraught with meaning, so I must go inside to find that meaning. All of this outside came from the inside. From the infinite inside, the finite has come. And since it came from the inside, which is infinite, it too turned infinite, didn't it? Infinite trees, infinite water, infinite waves. Everything is infinite. And it's eternal. Something dies, something else comes and takes its place. You can't find an end to it. So what's all this talk about death? That's an illusion. There's just rising and falling, and some play in between. So if that's applicable to the 5 elements and the 5 senses, how much more is it applicable to your soul, your consciousness, your awareness? So these are the kind of thoughts, the flights of philosophical fancy that they go on, you see. What's the meaning of asana? It means that I can sit here and finally be at peace. And if I can be at peace, I can finally start to think about things like this. Because it's when I think about things like this that I get insight. And it's through insight I get realization. Einstein said it nicely. If a man has free time, then he'll make progress. If he doesn't have free time, he won't. So if you're a culture that's preoccupied with filling every moment, cramming every minute of your life with activities and so forth, and the whole thing is about giving and receiving gifts, and then you come to the teacher and say, well, how come aparigraha is one of the no-nos? You shouldn't give gifts. Because by giving gifts and receiving gifts all the time, money, trying to please people, they trying to please you, commerce, jobs, occupations, you forget your past lifetimes. And there goes the meaning right out the door. This is a teaching of Father of Yoga. By concentrating too much on commerce and so gift giving and things like that, you forget your past lifetimes. But the minute you sit here and shut down the senses, you start to remember them. What's a déjà vu? It's a big word in decades gone by, you see. It's just a flash that I've been here before, as they say, you see. So you you've lived many bodies here, taken many bodies, and you've been to many places. So in one lifetime you go to the same place where you were in a previous lifetime. I've been here before. Not that hard. It's just a no-brainer, you see. You smell a certain thing, the sense of smell is connected to earth. You go somewhere on earth, you smell a fragrance, and you flash on some beautiful experience you had because it's based upon that particular scent of that flower, or that particular incense at that Buddhist temple you went by, or whatever it may be, you see. It's all connected. It's interconnected. It's all based in interdependent arising. Everything's dependent on everything else. It's like a big web. Lord Indra's jeweled net, they call it, you'll see, in the upper realms. See, he's got this jeweled net that covers everything, and each jewel, each tie of the net has a facet there with a window that you can look into all the worlds. So the jeweled net is just covering all the worlds, and he can look into each one of them. Beautiful story in the Itihasa of India, see, about Indra's jeweled net. Indra's the god of the gods. A very high position to hold. So, showing this non-touch yoga again, we can see some of the things that we looked at. See, we know for sure that, I'm not going to go through it again, but we know for sure that it all started with freedom from fear. If you have fear of death in India, that's called the lowest hell you can fall into. There are 5 hells. The first one is not knowing your true self. Avidya, it's called ignorance of your true self. The second one is called egotism. Your ego has become so inflated that it leaves no room for God. See? The mantra there isn't I am, it's I am superior to everyone else. See? Only I exist and I don't care about anyone else. See? That's not Advaita. Second hell then, the third hell is called attachment to things, you see. Selfish clinging, the Buddhists call it. Greed. The fourth hell is called aversion to things. Oh, it's an opposite. You see, I get attached and that's something else I don't like, I want away from it. But that thing I don't like was probably better for me than the thing that I liked. The thing that I liked drove me crazy. The thing I didn't like was that God putting something in front of me, as it were, to make me wake up, even if it was a bitter thing that woke me up, see. But then there's no hell lower than clinging to life. Abhinivesha is the word in Sanskrit. This is all yogic teaching. This is true yoga. If you're just involved in Hatha yoga, good start, but let's move on. There are the 4 great yogas, and Hatha isn't one of them. So an obsession with the body is not a good thing to start the Western culture with in the path of spirituality. If you do make that a start, then go on. Breathing exercises too. You can breathe in and out 100,000 times. It's not going to enlighten you. You're just a pair of bellows. So there are much higher and deeper climbs to go to, and this will awaken you spiritually. So non-touch yoga, really, that's what I was saying, clinging to life, the lowest hell, or sometimes they call it fear of death, is fear. So Gaudapada starts you out at a very high level. If you're a candidate for non-dual reality, you're going to have conquest over your fear. How about that for jump to the chase? See, usually fear is the last thing somebody's going to look into. See, the longer I can put that one off, the better. See, but he's facing it off right away. See, oh, I have to get out of this lowest hell and just pretty much make fear afraid of itself. And then I'll put death in its own grave. These are things my teacher told me. You must make fear afraid of itself. You must put death in its own grave. So this is non-touch yoga. It starts on that premise. So, as a review, we could just put this up so you can see some of the requisites of non-touch yoga. We went through all of this in the first class. For those of you who weren't with us, either live or live streaming, you can go back in the first class. It's up on Advaita Academy's website, and you can review the whole class and look at it. Connect, again, the connection's important, so connect that first class to what we're learning today. And what we're learning today starts off here with the precipitous ascent into higher awareness. But before we take that, we should probably also review and make sure that we're clear about what's called moksha. See, so it's mukti, moksha, kaivalya, samadhi, satori, those kinds of words all bespeak of absolute freedom. And non-touch yoga is nothing if it isn't that. It's showing you the true self, or Atman, which is not under the auspices of Maya. It's not under the trammels of the senses. It's not subject to suffering. And it's beyond the pairs of opposites, like good and bad and pleasure and pain, as we just chanted. So this chart here is a very good review to show us the nature of freedom. Now, the good thing about it is that it contrasts with what the West believes. You see, its idea of freedom. We might think of freedom as political freedom, or maybe getting free of work and going on a vacation. There are all kinds of different relative types of freedom that we assign the word to. But the seers, the enlightened souls, want to make very sure that you know that this, when you get this authentic desire to be free, that's called mumukshutvam. You see, that's coming from this word, mukti, mumukshutvam, or moksha. Those are the same Sanskrit roots. So those words imply something very, very unique as far as the word freedom goes, and this puts it very nicely. Mukti is not liberation from bondage. That's the first thing I would say. That is, you can practice the Hatha Yoga, you can practice the breathing exercises, you can practice the six-limb yoga, you can go and bow at the Guru's feet, you can do various things to try and make the soul pure, but the soul is already pure before you even thought about doing any of that. It's always free, ever free, never bound, is how Vivekananda put it. Ever free, never bound. So we shouldn't fall under the misnomer or the misconception that freedom is something that I gain. It is something that's my very nature. The soul is free. And that very thought has been inspiring. You see, it's been very inspiring for people who are seeking freedom, especially people who have not fallen under the misconception that freedom is of a relative type. Absolute freedom is what they're looking for. So let's go through and make sure that this is very well outlined. First, freedom cannot be produced or generated. That is, it's not freedom from the senses, it's not freedom from passion, it's not freedom from nature, it's not freedom from desire, and it's not freedom from sin. All of those are overlays, add-ons, sublations, modifications that you have taken on. That is, I am sinful, I am full of desire, I am attached to my senses. None of that had to be there in the first place, and the truth is, it's not there in your true self. Your true self is not subject to any of those five things. So you cannot produce or generate freedom. It's something that's already at hand. Look at Shankara's quote. Gaudapada had a great student called Shankara. And Shankara says here, freedom is not to be considered a state or experience yet to come. It is the eternal condition of the self which is nothing other than Brahman. So freedom is the eternal condition of your indwelling self. It's not something yet to come. Now I'm hearing my teacher echo from decades past, you see, when he says, I do not care for a post-mortem emancipation. I do not care for a post-mortem emancipation. He said that to us quite often. He's not looking for freedom after he dies, because it can't be produced or generated. It can't be put off to the future. If you understand freedom that way, then you're not talking about absolute freedom. You're talking about relative freedom. And you're not talking about the Atman, you're talking about the ego, mind complex. So to separate the wheat from the chaff, that Jesus said, you're going to have to do that strong discrimination. See, the real and the unreal. Vedanta is very well known for that. The real and the unreal. The essential and the non-essential. That which can be touched and that which cannot be touched, if you want to put it that way. Now, freedom is also not a result of evolution, development, or transformation. That last word is key, because everyone in the Western Hemisphere is looking for transformation. The chemists, the physicists, they're all completely under the hypnotism of things that change, things that transform. See, they're hypnotized by movement. And they've never been in a place where there was no movement. See, the soul, it's called. There's no movement in the soul, or in Brahman, or in Atman, or in Almighty Father, or in Allah, or in Buddha nature. There's no movement there. It stopped. You went into meditation and everything stopped. It stopped vibrating, if you want to put it that way. If that's what you understand the world to be, as vibrations, then you could say it all stopped vibrating. It got taken in and held in abeyance somewhere. The whole world got, in fact, all the worlds got taken captive. And so it's a matter of either being hypnotized by external things or dehypnotized by the untouched yoga, by the one reality. Who would you rather be hypnotized by? You see, you want that, have that concentrated third eye open, in which Christ said, "Thou shalt know the truth." What's that feel like? What kind of bliss is there? What kind of knowledge is there? What kind of understanding of existence is there? Sat Chidananda style, you see. So, transformation is a loaded word. It's called parinama in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is many, many millennia previous to Christ. So if you look at a word called parinama and you take its opposite, aparinama, then you have what Gaudapada is talking about, non-touch yoga. Aparinama means non-transformation. And when you unwrap that word, it means that transformation is an illusion. Nothing transforms. It just appears to. That is, everything is Brahman. Haven't we said that so many times? It is all God. But at the same time you go into the scriptures, they say Brahman is transformationless. It doesn't go through birth and death. It doesn't go through time. It doesn't go through phases. It isn't limited by space or senses or those kinds of things. So to keep your philosophy non-dual and to keep it accurate and to be faithful to it is to realize that there is no transformation going on. Gaudapada calls that ajativada, the path of those who know there is no birth, no species, no movement. Brahman is transformationless by nature. It's not going to change its nature and start transforming just for you, on account of your senses, on account of your ego. But Maya will do that for you just fine, you see. Maya will come along and with sleight of hand and prestidigitation will cause all of this to change, and it will cause it to change and make you believe that the change is real. Jagad Mithya, the world is not real. Brahman Satya, the Lord, Reality is real. That's Brahman Satya Jagad Mithya, one of the great mantras, if you will, of Indian thinking. So, another word there that would be good to unwrap would be evolution. If you become a Vedantist, if you become a seer, then you're going to be at odds with the evolutionary theory. One thing you're not going to accept is the 7-day creation theory. That's fine taken symbolically, but taken literally, of course, it's not. You should have more intelligence than that. And number two, evolution theory, 4,320,000,000 year cycles, ho-hum, you see, ho-hum. This cycle goes on and on and on forever, and it's never ending. You're talking about just one 4,320,000,000 year cycle in the physical universe only? Get a clue. These are cycles that are going on and on forever. They never end. Does the circle end? And these particular cycles or circles that don't end, great souls want off of. See, if the child goes around and around in a merry-go-round long enough, he's going to lose his lunch. It's not fun anymore. What he liked first as being very fun, he wants off. Or if you get in the bath and it feels nice at the beginning, and then you start to wilt. You say, I want out of the bath, I'm clean. The water's dirty. Wilting means you've experienced old age too much. You've had too many lifetimes where you thought birth, life, and death were real. But you never once knew eternal life. Isn't it strange? You took birth, life, and death to be real hundreds of times, but you never once came face to face with eternal life. Even Jesus came among the fishermen and said, you're missing one thing here, a spiritual life, an eternal life. Fishes, loaves, wives, nets, rivers, those are all fine and good. I'm glad you have them. But there's one essential thing you're missing. You might as well have taught them the non-touch yoga. You're missing that one thing that evolution cannot form, that nature cannot form. Nature tries to form everything, but it failed in the case of Brahman. It always remains formless. So my point being here, transformationless, free of evolution, you cannot get freedom through those things. You're barking up the wrong tree. You haven't even found the right forest yet. So you come to grips, you see, with this great non-dual philosophy, this great non-dual realization, as beings like Gaudapada and Shankara and Vivekananda and Lord Vashishta and Buddha and others did. And you get your philosophical T's crossed and I's dotted. And then you clear up the misunderstandings and you get khyati, clarity. Now I have khyati. As Vivekananda put it, I have a clear light now, free of all hocus pocus. It's a direct quote from him when he was here in 1893 in his letters. I have a clear light now, free of all hocus pocus. We should strip religion of all its superstitions. You take them symbolically, fine, I don't have a problem with them. They have some value. But you're taking the wrong things literally. Let's take that one right thing literally. That's called enlightenment. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of that. We just chanted that. Well, if you want to flesh it out more, there it is. Not the solving of problems. That's not freedom. It's not brought about by some power above or outside of you. Speaking about divesting ourselves of superstitions. We don't look up to pray anymore, I hope. I hope we all got over that. You look inward to pray. It's always been the case. Christ looked inward to pray. The kingdoms of heaven are within you. The Lord is within you. How clear do we have to make it even for modern times, you see? So it's not some power above you or outside of you in nature. That's not freedom either. You're not going to find freedom there. Freedom already is at hand, all the time, eternally, in that eternal moment, and you must stop everything and place yourself in that eternal moment. It's as simple as that, and that's called meditation. It's also called deep sleep. It's also unfortunately called death. You don't want to wait for death to have that still moment. And it's called by superlative names like samadhi or satori or beatific vision or kaivalya, moksha, mukti, you see. That's what they're talking about. That birthless, deathless, eternal moment where all change went away, where everything became stable and solid, like Shiva, sitting in his asana in deep samadhi. It's not the disappearance of weakness or imperfections. If you think that'll give you freedom, that's not quite it. In other words, it's not anything that can be gained by a practice. That's next. It cannot be attained. It's not the result of a movement away from one's source. That is, you say, I've gotten away from my source, and now I have to get back to it. It's called bondage and liberation, you see. But you never can move from your source because it's your source. You can't move away from your true nature because it's your true nature. You're just dreaming yourself away from the source, thinking yourself to be apart from your true nature. So Advaita wants to clear this up right away. See, why are you doing that? Sort of like a parent sitting with a petulant child who keeps doing something over and over again that's wrong. So you can't figure out, why do you do that? Why do you do that? So Advaita is like that great father, that great grandfather of philosophies, looking at you and saying, why are you doing that? Why do you keep believing in that projection of your own mind? Why do you keep coming back and again and exchanging places with your ancestors? Didn't Buddha show you how to get off the Kala Chakra, the wheel of time? For 2,500 years you've heard about him, and you haven't looked into his beautiful method yet? You didn't believe him when he spoke the first noble truth? 2 words, suffering is. What didn't you understand about that? That this world is full of suffering. You thought it was your oyster? Why did everyone that we know that's enlightened renounce it then? Why do monks renounce it? By the hundreds and thousands. Why did Gaudapada and Shankara renounce it? Because they had found something that was beyond. Gatam, gatam, paragatam, is how Buddha put it. I've gone beyond the goals, all goals, to the highest goal. Gatam, goal, paragatam, supreme goal. So I'm not saying give up all the relative goals, fulfill yourself in them. Fulfill yourself in the Dharma. That is, learn morals and ethics, then go on to the Dharma and the teachings, then extract wisdom out of them, and then get to truth. Wisdom leads to truth. And then if you can do that, you see, you can dance around the room with Gauranga and Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad and others, you see, in a big party, you see. When will I be so fortunate as to have the company of Jesus, of Buddha, of Krishna, of Ram, of Gauranga, of Moses, of Muhammad? When will I be so fortunate as to have their company? That's what one song sings in India. So that one thing is enough under that third heading. It's not the result of a movement away from your source, because you cannot move away from your source. It wouldn't be called your source if you could alienate yourself for it. Can a river move away from the Himalayan lake that makes it run? Can the lake move away from the rain? Can the rain move away from the clouds? It's all source, you see. The fourth entry there is not something to be realized via purification. We're talking about freedom, real, true freedom. Moksha, mukti, kaivalya. That is, it's not due to the soul's fall from its original status. It's not because the world is corrupt and needs escaping, and it's not because the soul has gathered impurities. So these are 4 entries there that try and convince you that mukti is not liberation from bondage. It's an ever eternal state, always at hand in you. So we're trying to remove that idea from our mind about the true meaning, the false meaning of moksha. The Avatutta Gita puts it this way: the soul is not purified by the 6-limbed yoga, nor is it made pure by the destruction of the mind's vibrations. It's not rendered pure by bowing at the Guru's feet. The soul is pure by its very nature. Sadanga naiva natu naiva shudam. Guru padesha natu naiva shudam. Manavinasha natu naiva shudam. Manavinasha, destroying the mind's waves, is not enough to get you freedom. You cannot get freedom. You cannot attain freedom. So change your thinking around this. Freedom is mine, always. Always has been, always will be, never was not mine. I'm now a non-touch yoga luminary, see. I've gotten that one thing clear. I might as well be the incarnation of Gaudapada. See? I'm one with him. I agree with him. Makes the most sense to me. Non-transformation, ajativada, non-origination, he sometimes called it. There is no origination to anything, has no origin, you see. The closest thing to an origin is what Jesus called the Word, and what Christians later called Genesis. You go back to the Word and you'll find where everything's coming from. But the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It was in the beginning, but then it was with God, then it was God. So the Word's a very powerful thing. Everything emanating out of it, like Ramakrishna said. When I first saw and heard Om, I saw all the worlds coming out of it and going back into it, and not a moment was passing as it did so. It was all happening in an eternal moment. Everything rising and falling all the time, so that you couldn't put your finger on where a beginning or a middle or an end was. Doesn't it sound like this world? Can you put your beginning on the middle, your finger on the beginning of this world, or are you just going to speculate about a big bang that happened way back somewhere? Or go around pronouncing, Armageddon on everything. Who cares if this world blows up? There are millions others in space. You don't think consciousness can go occupy them if it wants? What is the real thing here, consciousness or matter? Who's your daddy? You see? Yeah, who's your mama? You see, who's in charge here might be a better question. Consciousness or matter? By looking at people, you'd think matter would be in charge. And the senses are hypnotized by matter, so they become bond slaves. But these seers are not having that. Father of Yoga's whole thing, by propounding the 8-limbed yoga in that time when he was born, maybe a couple hundred years after Christ, see, Father of Yoga was there. His whole thing was the seer has become attached to the seen. We want to reverse that problem. That's basically yoga right there. Why should I propound the 8-limbed yoga and produce a new system for everyone, which, by the way, was marvelous and became extremely popular and famous, yoga? Why should I do that? Because the seer has become attached to the seen. And that's unhealthy. If you had gone back a few thousand years, Kapila would have told you, yes, the Purusha is, the master of Prakriti. It's not the other way around. Nature didn't produce the soul, and then the soul, you see, strove for freedom. The soul was always free, and it produced nature so they could play in it. But when it went out to play, it got attached, you see. It broke the rules of the play. And now it's suffering, and that's why suffering is. Remind me to look back on this film, because I just could answer the question now when people come up and tell me, what is suffering? I came at it from the opposite direction, you see. Why is suffering? Where is suffering? Who is suffering? When do you suffer? Why, where, when, and what? And who? The 5 W's. See? You say when, it means time, right? You say why, it means cause and effect. When you say what, it means location. And when you say who, it means you. So the best of all is saying who. It's the highest question. Time, space, location, cause and effect, those things flummox you and lead the soul in circles, in these cycles. Can't get off this round of birth and death. Now, there you see what I'm just talking about here, the Jivan Mukta, or the free soul. One person came to class this afternoon and said, I'm a Jivan Mukta. I said, well, we need more of those. We need more of those here. Jivan, embodied soul, Mukta, free. This is a person who's free while they're in the body. And that's why my teacher loved Gaudapada, Iskarika, and Shankara, and why the whole monastic order of Ramakrishna order is very keen on the non-dual philosophy that Gaudapada championed at that particular phase of time he was born in. That Jivan Mukta is a principle whose time has come. We want all souls to be free. That's a quote from Vivekananda. I want everyone to be free as the air. So there you see a description of the Jivan Mukta. If you are a Jivan Mukta, then this is what you are. You live in the mortal frame as Brahman. The Jivan Mukta lives in the body as Brahman. Those who know Brahman become Brahman. It can be proved by the Upanishads. That's a statement from the Upanishads. Those who know Brahman become Brahman. So if you become a knower of Brahman, then you live as Brahman in the mortal frame. And that's a pretty non-touch thing to do. You can put it this way, you can associate with the 5 senses, the 5 elements, but you never become identified with them. You never identify soul with matter. You can associate with it, that's called sportive play. But Gaudapada said, why would consciousness want to play? So he wasn't really into the idea of Leela. He was into the non-touch yoga completely. There's nothing that can compete with the non-touch yoga. And he tends to convince everyone about that too. It's very convincing, and I can make an announcement now about next year. We're going to look into the Gaudapada Karika at one of our retreats. This will be our 3rd foray into that great commentary that has impressed everyone in the world of philosophy, East and West. Gaudapada's Karika made the biggest impression, philosophically speaking. And it's because it's not just a philosophy. It's a truth. It's an axiom. It's a principle. It's a maxim. It's a way of living spirituality. The Jivan Mukta also sports in the world as if it were the playground of Shakti. So here's where I said earlier that Gaudapada was not only a proponent of the non-touch yoga, but he was also a worshipper of Mother, Shakti. And he, of course, was a Shaivite. So he blends Shaktism, Shaivism, and Advaita in his path. That's very powerful. Where's the room for ignorance when you blend 3 great systems like that together successfully? Then people 1,500 years down the line are going to be impressed by your philosophy. It's still living. And we're still talking about it. I'm still babbling about it. See? I'm going on and on about it. It really can't be described either, yet here we are still trying to define it, unwrap it in different ways. So, Shakti is a very important element. It's the dynamic side of Brahman. It's one with Brahman, like Ramakrishna said, fire and its heat. Can you separate the two? Can you separate water from wetness? Can you separate white from milk? Can you separate humor from a joke? Has to be a good joke, right, Gyanashri? Has to be a good joke. Anyway, a path from its destination, these are things that cannot be separated out. In the same way, you cannot separate Brahman, the absolute reality, from its dynamic power. So when we're talking non-touch yoga, we're not negating the world. We're saying, see the world as Brahman. This is what people don't understand about Vedanta and Buddhism. They say, oh, it's life negating, on and on. A bunch of nonsense in their head, you see. It's not life negation at all. It's becoming very clear about the reality of things, seeing things as they are. And then you're free. You can do what you like. See? So, very important that one becomes aware of the dynamic power of Brahman. Because then you don't just leave Brahman as some transcendent, sterile thing, you see. Almighty Father, Buddha nature, you see, Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Oh, those words are far beyond my comprehension. Well, I still have the dynamic power through which to understand such things. Sri Ramakrishna said, a snake sometimes is still, and then sometimes it wriggles across the floor. Can you separate the wriggling motion from the snake? They're one and the same, aren't they? In that same way, sometimes Brahman is still, sometimes it breaks into movement. Sometimes an ocean has no waves, other times waves come. So everything here that you see outside yourself is just saying to you, Brahman, Shakti, Brahman and Shakti, Brahman and Shakti. Sri Ramakrishna looked out on the world and he said, I see everything here is just a combination of Shiva and Shakti. The union of the male and female principle. That's Tantra. It's all come about by that Brahman and Shakti connection, you see. And we're saying that that's freedom and that's eternal. When you have that kind of realization, then that's called freedom. And you're free on the spot. And you'll never fall into bondage again. That you ever fell into bondage in the first place was a great error that your soul made. Not your eternal soul, your transmigrating soul, your body-mind mechanism. I hope by now, as long as by the time you got to understanding the Sparsha Yoga, that you would have practiced some other yogas that lead you up to that. One of them called Neti Netis, for instance. That you realized you're not the body, and you're not the senses, and you're not the mind, and you're not the intellect, and you're not the prana, the life force. I hope you accomplished that, because that was some of the requisites that got rid of your fear in the first place, because all fear is associated with you thinking that you're a body that's born and dies. See, I'm afraid of dying. Then it doesn't end there. I'm afraid of being reborn. I got over my fear of death, so what do I have left? Fear of being reborn again. See? I don't want to go through this again. I ask my students that. Are you done? Is this it? Do you want to come back? Once they hear the truth, they don't want to come back again. Not in ignorance anyway. If you can come back in knowledge with your third eye open, then it's play, it's sport. So this is what we're describing. A person who lives free, always, a Jivan Mukta. In Buddhism it's called a Bodhisattva. The third entry there is sees the universe as transcendental consciousness. So, all is Brahman. We just chanted that. Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagatsha. Vedanta Siddhanta. The conclusion, Siddhanta, of Vedanta is that all this is Brahman. Time, space, living being, the world, all Brahman. See? So the Jivan Mukta actually sees this, walks around seeing everything as Brahman. When he looks at a tree or a forest or an ocean, says that's Brahman, he doesn't mean the form is Brahman. He means the underlying reality out of which the form came. So he's not taking wooden nickels. His philosophy isn't, it's not like it's never been tested. See? He's tested it in the fire of yoga. They sing songs about that. Chaitanya Shashvata Shanto Vyomatita Niranjana Vedantam Vijasuryaya Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Deva Maheshwara Gurureva Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Goes on to sing Aneka Janma Sampraptir Karmendana Vidahine Atma Jnana Agnidanena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Atma Jnana Agni Danena. You have awakened the fire, the Jnana Agni, the fire of wisdom. You have opened my third eye so that I can see the true Lord and Teacher. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara. Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva. You see. And Guru Sakshi Param Brahma. Parameva. Guru Eva. The one Guru, the one Teacher, the one reality. You have opened my inner eye of wisdom with the fire of knowledge. Now I'm free and clear of all ignorance. See? And the verses go on like that. He's talking about his teacher. And his teacher's teacher, like Gaudapada and Govindapada and Shankara, you see. When such a revelation like that happens between divine beings, then it lasts for centuries, millennia. And they can trace their lineage back to great souls. Realized souls. Just back to, say, the kings and queens of England. Or continuing to be reborn again and again. Being reborn is a good thing, but don't be reborn again and again. Get out of the wheel of birth and death and live eternally. No matter if you take on a form or not. See? If you take on a form, you'll come and see everything as consciousness. You'll be in the sporting ground of Shakti, and you'll live in the physical form as if you were Brahman himself, itself. And finally, you will view all objects as representations of Om, the Word. In my waking, in my dreaming, in my deep sleep state, I will see everything as the Word, vibrating. In other words, if I see physical objects, I'm not going to get sidetracked or waylaid by thinking about atomic particles, neutrons, protons, quarks, subatomic particles, vibrating at a billionth of a second. Why don't I just cut to the chase and say it's all vibration stemming from the Word? And the Word is full of intelligence. The very intelligence through which I created the electron microscope is that Brahman, you see. The power which sees is that Brahman. Power which hears, power which knows, that's my intelligence. That's very, very close to Brahman. So, this is a little bit of a discourse on what Indian philosophy calls moksha, or mukti, true freedom, so that we don't mistake it when we enter into spiritual life chasing after some relative freedom. We know without a doubt what the underpinnings and what the commands, the commandments if you want, are about what true freedom is, so that you don't get sidetracked. If you find out that you're not measuring up to true freedom, fine. You have relative freedom, but don't contradict and don't compromise true freedom. Know what it is and then measure yourself up to it. Vivekananda said, you do not pull God down to your comfort zones. You raise yourself up to God. That is, means inward. And in that way, then you don't compromise yourself, the truth, or these great philosophies that have come, like yoga and Vedanta, to help us. Now, let's, in the time remaining in this first half, before we take our break, look at how a person would become a Jivan Mukta. The precipitous ascent into higher awareness is here. This is just the outline of a Himalayan mountain that I took. It was one of a whole range that stretched on as far as my eye could see on either side. And used that particular slope as a backdrop for this precipitous ascent that the soul has to make. If they're interested in spirituality, that is. Now, whether to start at the top or the bottom is always the question. Shall we start in the valley and try and climb it, or shall we state the truth out front and then come down and see how we fall? How things become convoluted. Well, we can at least start at the top of the chart with Buddha's quote, because he includes both of these tendencies. He says, "Wide awake among sleeping souls, the wisdom knower forges ahead of them like a powerful steed outstrips a mule. And when the wise one, having ascended to the high tower of inner perception, looks out upon the world of suffering beings, he does so with an afflicted and compassionate heart. He beholds the ignorant masses as a mountaineer on the slopes espies people down in a valley." Lord Buddha talking in the Dhammapada, the great early Buddhist scripture. So he's speaking already from the standpoint of a highly realized soul, and how that soul will look out. He'll see people at different levels of realization of their awareness. He's not actually saying that they're bound. He knows that they're free, ever free. So he's not going there to try and help them, see, out of some great compassion. He feels compassion, but all he wants to do is awaken them up to their Buddha nature, which already exists. He knows he's not going to introduce anything new to them. They've just fallen asleep to their true nature. It's a matter of forgetfulness. So don't forget to remember, as the song says. See, Sri Durganam Buluna, 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 Buluna. Do not forget to remember your Divine Mother. And she will awaken you. See, just thoughts of her. When Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva have a problem, they're the highest beings you can possibly think of. Who do they go to? Who are you going to call? See, Divine Mother. Now meditate on her. Usually Lord Brahma says, there's a problem we can't solve here, so I think I'll meditate on Mother. And immediately his four faces, so you start chanting the Vedas and the Upanishads. His four faces chant the four Vedas. And that's always a sign that Mother is about to appear. And then she comes out of nowhere, as it were, and she appears and solves their problems. So that Shakti power we're talking about is embodied and epitomized as Divine Mother of the Universe. The Buddhists know this too. They call her the Mother of the Buddhas. Pragya Paramita, there's a great sutra written to her, and others scriptures too. So everyone knows about her. Awakening people to their true nature, that's her business. Now, if you go to the bottom of the mountain there's no doubt that there are beings who are dwelling in a very difficult, straitened circumstances. This quote from Lord Vasishtha puts it nicely. "There is no real spiritual progress to be made for those plodding and monotonous beings who occupy the dry plains, infertile valleys, and low-lying marshes of vacuous thought and superficial activity." So this mundane human convention, or mundane human conventional bind that we find ourselves in, are one of the early things we have to break out of. We feel bound by those things. And that immediately transgresses this law of perfection, doesn't it? Eternal perfection. To feel bound is not a good thing when you are eternally free. There's something amiss, something going wrong here. So Vasishtha has noted the being has to begin to work his way out, and they will usually do that by karma. You see, karma yoga is everyone's business, really. Everyone acts. They can't help but act. There may be an actionless pinnacle that you're going to get to, form a samadhi, non-touch yoga. But in the meantime, you have to be practical and go by avastas, stages. One by one, you have to ascend this mountain slope of non-dual realization. So there you see the quote from the Dhammapada again. The careless man who exerts stressfully, heedless of higher purpose, scatters karma-laden activities like dust across the plains. Lord Buddha is saying in the Dhammapada. So earthly toil, or karma bandha, it's called, one has to begin to look for a higher kind of karma. And then you see that reflected in the slope. See how very steep it is. But there's beginning to be a little bit of ease come to you when you begin to infuse your activities with a little energy called rajas. Yes, it's still restless, but it's better than the low-lying marshes of vacuous thought where tamas prevails. So you're going to want to invigorate yourself, and the early stages of that's called raja, you see, rajas. It's frenetic activity, and from there you can get to balance, sattva. But you don't want to stay in tamas. So Vivekananda says here, and I quoted this morning at our satsang, do not work yourself out, it is of no use. Duty is the midday sun, whose fierce rays are burning the very vitals of humanity. It is necessary for a time as a discipline. Beyond that is a morbid dream. So this constant round of activity then has to find its release. And usually that's where a being begins to, as Sri Ramakrishna said, long for freedom. And the first signs of that longing are bhakti, usually, devotion. As he said, you begin to cry tears for love of God. You begin to have feelings of yearning for this freedom we're talking about. You wouldn't be crying about being free if freedom wasn't already there inside of you. You already experienced it before, you've already heard about it. It's the source of your being, the core of your being. So when you contrast that to the feeling of being bound, as we were just saying, then you begin to yearn for freedom. As they say in Ireland and England and so forth, begin to pine for the fjords. Pine for the fjords. You want the higher climb. You want the mountaintop of spiritual experience, not the low-lying marshes and valleys where people are strewing karma-laden activities like dust. That's a very polluted valley we're talking about. See, the vibrations are very gross. So then up that step you encounter bhakti, and that leads you to wisdom samadhi. Vedavyas says, when the mind's thoughts have been brought under control by spiritual practice and careful discernment, the four wisdom samadhis dawn. Conscious thought, subtle thought, blissful thought, and merged thought. Those are savitarka, savichara, nirvitarka, nirvichara, and sasmita and sananda. Those are four kinds of samadhis that the Father of Yoga plotted out for you that are wisdom samadhis. They're not the non-touch yoga samadhi yet, that's non-dual. But these wisdom samadhis are slopes, you see. They're part of the pathway up to the mountaintop of spiritual experience. And that's where you begin to meditate. You see, these yogas all have their facility. And when you get to Raja Yoga, that means yoga of meditation. Now you're getting close to something that's inactive, something that resembles Brahman, static, stable, always peaceful, ever free, never bound. As one Chinese poet put it, breathless air of heights. Breathless air of heights, that's the feeling. It's like you're standing on a very high mountain and you just look out and there's falling away into space. So you have this beautiful view. So you have this exhilarated feeling inside of it. Well, you can many times over, you can feel that accented in spiritual life. You can imagine what it would look like to be doing that physically, but then all of a sudden you have this beautiful spiritual elation. And the quote there is from the father of yoga. He says, "The noble mind leans ever towards kaivalya," that was his word for freedom, the separation of the soul from insentient matter. All that is beautiful, propitious, beneficial, and utterly desirable leads toward this liberation. Otherwise, one is led down the evil path and suffers evil results. So, he's trying to convince us that everything that's beautiful, propitious, beneficial to ourselves is gained by that superlative state, which Gaudapada is calling the non-touch yoga. He's calling it kaivalya. But kaivalya too is got a slight trace of penultimate level in it. The soul is separating itself from matter, because at the very outset, remember, Patanjali was saying the soul the seer has become attached to the seen, right? So if you've affected this detachment of the seer from the seen, then that means the spirit is beginning to know itself to be non-material. It's not matter. So the more clear that realization dawns in your mind that you're not matter, then the more mature your realization is becoming. Your neti-neti will be turning into iti-iti. Your wisdom samadhi will be turning into non-dual samadhi. Your non-touch yoga will be upon you, and you'll be living in that. And once you taste that breathless air of heights, nothing else will compare to it ever again. You'll never want to go back down to these valleys of vacuous thoughts, and karma laden. See, you have to get a taste of that. So that's what what to speak of Gaudapada, Patanjali is promising you. Everything that's propitious, beneficial, and beautiful is actually right there in that spiritual height. Now, Sri Ramakrishna has a way of putting it here. He says, yes, God has form, but then again he has none. Do you know how it is? Brahman is like a shoreless ocean wherein blocks of ice get formed by the cooling power of bhakti. Then upon the rising of the sun of jnana, wisdom, the embodied God melts back into the infinite and formless ocean of Brahman. So even at that level, you can say, it looks like there's a grand cycle going on here of bhakti and jnanam, of duality to non-duality, back again. And in between there's a kind of qualified non-duality that's going on. That I can show you after the break. The differences between dualism, qualified non-dualism, and dualism, something that is also a very clarifying bit of wisdom that we should take on and understand, so that we know when we meet a dualist, we know that we meet a qualified non-dualist, and we know when we meet a non-dualist like Gaudapada, where they're coming from, you see, where their mind is, and also where our own minds are in any given day, time, month, year, or lifetime. As I said, when you learn this non-touch yoga, or the Advaita Vedanta we call it, and I started out the class by saying, Vivekananda stated, Advaita Vedanta will be the future religion of mankind. There is no doubt about that. So when people start having this realization of what he called Advaita Vedanta, or what Gaudapada called 1500 years before Vivekananda, the non-touch yoga, then nothing else will compare. See? So they asked Holy Mother, Sri Sharda Devi, my teacher's teacher once, what are we? Are we dualists? Are we qualified non-dualists? What are we? What do we call ourselves? The devotees of Ramakrishna. Because, he had so many. He had all of this. He had God with form, and he had God beyond form, didn't he? He had all the samadhis. He had all the yogas. He had all the religions. So who are we then to follow him, you see? What do we call ourselves? You are non-dualists, she said. You're Advaitists. Since he was an Advaitist, You are an Advaitist. Because he couldn't have had all that unless he had have understood the Advaita. That's the string running through the pearls that Krishna talks about. You love the necklace, no doubt. It's beautiful to look upon. But it's the string that's keeping it all together. So all the religions, all the philosophies, all the darshanas, they're all beautiful in their own setting. But it's that string running through all of them that keeps it all together. If you're an Advaitist, that's what you love. That subtle string. Sutra, it's called. You see. Sutra Dara. She's the holder of the string that keeps everything together on all levels of life. Physical, like you ask, well, why are the atoms and the molecules, and why is everything rotating around itself, you see? Not only in a little tiny atom, out in space might as well be a little atom, right? The macrocosm, because everything is revolving around itself up there too. What keeps that all together? The simple version would be love. The naive, innocent child would say, well, love keeps it all together. But here's what keeps it all together, this non-dual string. It keeps together everything. And it keeps together not only in the physical level, but all the way up to the philosophical level. This is the truth, thou shalt know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. That's a Jivan Mukta. And more power to those. So Ramakrishna puts it all together very nicely, as he should, being the harbinger of Advaita Vedanta in this day and age. You say, well, Vivekananda really brought the Advaita. Do you know what Ramakrishna made Vivekananda do when he was young, teenager? He made him sit and read the Avadhuta Gita and the Ashtavakra Samhita and non-dual texts, and Vivekananda wasn't having it. Oh, the cup is God, the spoon is God. What nonsense. So, no, just go on reading, Ramakrishna said. So he made him read this out loud. Later on, Vivekananda said, oh, this is my special thing, non-duality. Now I understand. Ramakrishna was working on him, you see. So he was across the river from the Kali temple at his ancestral home, you see, after Ramakrishna made him read these things, you see. And he was making comments like, oh, the cup is God, everything is God. How ridiculous. See? He had a point too. Then all of a sudden his mother was feeding him, and Ramakrishna was meditating on it. All of a sudden the cup and the spoon and everything were God to him. He had this deep vision, you see. The food was God, the cup was God, the spoon was God, the very things he was complaining about that were not God, so bitterly to Ramakrishna, all of a sudden turned to God right in front of him. So there was the avatar and his chief disciple, his direct disciple, enacting this for us again. It's been enacted so many times in so many ages, as far back as you can remember and beyond. This same divine couple coming and showing us. And in this particular case, showing us the continuity of consciousness, the homogeneity of awareness. How precious that is. See? That's what they're all on about. See? This is what they like to talk about. God, God, and nothing but God. Non-duality, Advaita, non-touch yoga, Nirvikalpa Samadhi. See? Nothing else is really worth talking about to them anymore. Hear ye, O children of immortal bliss, I have found the truth that will set you free. It wasn't just Christ that said that. Thousands of years prior to that, the rishis were putting that in the Upanishads. Hear ye, O children of immortal bliss, I have found the truth. So they were declaring it to the heavens, see, broadcasting it to everyone. So on that note, we should stop here and take a break, and we will come back and finish this side of the chart up, because this chart is the very steep, precipitous path called Neti Neti that's been mentioned a couple times. And then after that, we will take a few other teachings to finish our fourth class in the non-touch yoga of Gaudapada, or Advaita Yoga. So here we will take 10 or 15 minutes. The live streaming audience may look at these charts up close on the camera, on their computers, and we will all take some refreshment and meet with you soon. Namaste and aloha for your kind attentions. in the second half of our class on Gaudapada's non-touch yoga, or Asparsha yoga, or Advaita yoga. Any of those terms can be used. It's basically non-duality, not to put too common a turn on it, because it's very rare, yet it is the underlying substratum of all philosophies, like that thread going through the pearls, as we were saying just before the first half ended. And we also were trying to have some nice philosophical closure on this chart, the precipitous ascent. I had to practice saying that a few times, precipitous ascent, so that I wouldn't blow it on camera. So there's kind of a tongue twister there. Into higher awareness, which is your awareness, which is your very self, or your very self-nature. We call that word Atman in Vedanta, or Buddha nature in Buddhism. It's the eternal soul, as compared to or contrasted to the transmigrating soul that's dreaming itself in rounds of birth and death, and that's very well illustrated right here. I mean, pretty much everything that you can infer if you put together Islam, Christianity, and Buddhism is right there in their fundamental teachings. There you see it's the the slope there, you might say, the ski slope, if you would say so. There's the hells, worldliness and mundane human convention, and then here's the moral and ethical existence, and here's the earths, and then the heavens. So what's been being inferred by a diagram like that is the rounds of birth and death that Buddha talked about, or the going from heaven to earth and hell that Christianity speaks of, and the paradise and so forth that the Muslims speak of. This is an idea of movement, isn't it? So it wouldn't be acceptable to Gaudapada as a high philosophy. It would be more to him like a dream. And it wouldn't be a sport either, because a sport is done by a free soul. So a dreamer is not free. And so the teachings of India say, dreamer, awake, you must awake from your dream. And we know that Ramana Maharshi, who was another very profound non-dualist in very recent times, living as early as recently as the mid-1900s, said that that you must awaken from both dreams. The waking state is dream number 1, and the dreaming state is dream number 2. So it's not like you just go to dream tonight, use your subtle senses and have some foggy dreams or something, and then come back and only remember a few of them, and all of a sudden you're in the waking state, and you've come back to another state of dreaming when you come to the waking state. This is under the auspice of Maya, and that this is going on. See, but Maya is not a sentient principle either. It's just the power of covering and the power of distorting. That's how they describe this queen of all four-letter words, Maya. It's the power of form to cover formless reality, and also to take something and make it look different than what it is, distortion. So, Avarana Shakti, covering power of obscuration, or Vikshepa Shakti, distortion. These are what people are laboring under in Maya that keeps them from having that third eye open and having clear vision about who they are, where they are, and so forth. So this is Vedanta Philosophy 101, really, at a very high level. It's Brahman and it's Maya. There's poison in the snake, but the snake doesn't die. It bites you, you might die. So that's how all good and bad and mixed things exist in Brahman, but Brahman's not affected by them. That's how Ramakrishna is trying to say. So immediately you kind of clear the ground on the moral and ethical level and on the emotional level, don't you? Because now you're not thinking in terms of, oh, God is making me do it, or devil is making me do it. You just take that out of the quotient, and you see that it's all just happening in Maya, and you're buying into it. And Maya is happening at the individual and at the collective level of mind. And Mahamaya, the great Maya, is happening at the cosmic level of mind, where the Trinity is. You see them here? here. Realms of Ishvara, the Trinity, the Vairajas, who are the seven seers of the seven realms, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, Janaloka, Tapaloka, Brahmaloka, so forth. And the seers and the other luminaries, that's the realm of Ishvara, the realm of the highest form. That's what Christ referred to when he said you get to the Father through the Son. That's the Son. Any supremely realized soul that holds a very high station through which you will traverse on this inward precipitous journey, inward and upward. I used to call it inward ascension. One of my first musical pieces I ever composed, I named it Inward Ascension. I was in my 20s. That was based on this kind of philosophy I was reading. Well, I like that idea of inward ascension. You don't look up anymore, you look inward. But you're looking upwards inwardly. It's a highfalutin philosophy you're on the track of, you see. And it inspires me. So I need to take it to the end. I need to take this path to the end. Lo and behold, find out there is no end. You see, because there was no beginning. She stumped again, you see. So this beautiful non-dual philosophy brings an end to all transmigration in Maya. That is dreaming, souls dreaming that they're moving. And all of a sudden they end up stable, like you do in meditation, or like you do on your bed tonight in deep sleep. You're just motionless. You're thoughtless, in a good way. Your vibrations have stopped. Everything is quelled. Matter has gone away. Nature has gone away. Maya has gone away, at least temporarily. And you wake up into this dream number one again, the waking state, and all comes dancing back, you see. And now I have to deal with it, and suffering is there. And I need to do my spiritual practice, you see. So this is all really about those worlds of name and form that happen at the most basic level. I'd say the grossest level, not gross horrible, but gross dense. And we say there's no other word really in English to substitute for stula. You see, like the grossest body or the grossest world. Doesn't mean gross, like, ew, that's gross, brother. But it means that's dense, that's heavy. It's vibrating, very weighty, like granite, you see. So that's why Vivekananda, in his great poem, says, say peace to all. From me, no danger be to aught that lives. That's ahimsa, non-violence. From me, no danger be to aught that live. From those that dwell on high to those that lowly creep, I am the self in all. All worlds, both here and there, do I renounce. All heavens, all earths, all hells, all hopes and all fears. Thus cut thy bonds. Could it be any more beautiful, any more clear, of a directive for the soul to get free, to have its freedom, the freedom that's innate in it? Why have you alienated yourself from it and began to believe in anything that's on this chart except the highest? All of this is a dream. Even your sadhana is a dream. You're going from pretend bondage to pretend freedom. Mm-hmm. But that's how Advaita Asparsha Yoga Gaudapada would put it. Why are you doing that? Stop enacting this play. He doesn't even like the idea of sporting. See, why would the reality that's perfect want to sport? Does it have some desire to sport? Or does it just want to stay in its own pristine nature? Like sitting on the top of this mountain and just like Shiva, you know. In the highest, most peaceful, remote pilgrimage possible for the soul. Non-duality. Vivekananda used to say, you know, he had diabetes toward the end of his 39-year-old life. Called it a horrible disease. He said, up here in the Himalayas, I have no disease. All I have is the mountains and a scripture. And I'm perfectly happy sitting here in the cold, looking out on the view and reading my scripture and meditating. I have the fire of yoga. That's a paraphrase, but very close to the exact quote that he said about his feeling of being up in the Himalayas, you see. Not only did he want to realize the highest spiritual plateau, but he also wanted to do it physically. That's why they go to the Himalayas, or why the soul takes a pilgrimage or a retreat. You see. And they want it all to be spiritual. They want to see even this here as Brahman. The last word in spiritual life, Sri Ramakrishna said, was to see all as Brahman. Even this dense, gross vibrational world, is nothing but Brahman. So I must prove it to myself. So all of this really is about samsara. There's a nice word for you. Maya is one word. Samsara is how Buddhists would call it. It's the rounds of birth and death and ignorance. So cut your bonds. All heavens, all earths, all hells, all hopes, and all fears, the very first requisite of non-touch yoga. Cut them away. You are the supreme eternal self, pure and perfect, without inception, beyond all beginnings and middles and ends. Thou art that. Tattvamasi. Now realize that and live in it, wherever you might find yourself, in a body or not. If you realize that and you find yourself in a body, guess what? You're a Jivan Mukta. You have Jivan Mukti. Mukti means, there is no word for it in English, because if you say liberation, it means you were once bound. So you can't really put a word on it. That's why it's non-touch, it's non-speak, it's non-hear, it's non-smell, it's non-description. See, if you say I'm free, it means you were once bound. So you can't even begin to approach it. It's non-touch yoga. I hope you understand how elevated that is, a station. All you can do is be it. And if you hear a teacher speak about it, if he's doing a decent job of it, and you'll get inspired. You begin to remember back in your mind, that's my true nature. That's freedom. That's bliss. That's supreme non-dual wisdom. I know that. I know that. It sounds very familiar to me. Guess what? It's the ring of truth. And mumukshutvam is what you're going to try and gain before you get it. The desire, the singular, authentic desire for freedom. It's not a fake desire. No, it's not a let's make a run at the gates kind of desire and then fall back. See, it's knowing yourself to be free before you even begin any journey towards freedom. It's a freedom that's already at hand. Shankara put it very nice in the Viveka Chudamani. It's already here upon you, just like Brahman is. You could think, I think I'll go seek Brahman. Mm-hmm. But before you even had the thought, Brahman was already there. And it was Brahman that gave you the thought, I think I'll go seek Brahman. You see? It's faster than the fastest. It's slower than the slowest. It's higher than the highest. It's lower than the lowest. It outstrips all that run. Quote from the Upanishads. Some great seers like Gautabali think, how do I explain this to them? What I just experienced, you see. Oh, it's higher than the highest, but it's also lower than the lowest. You see. It outstrips all that runs. It's immovable. What's a good word for it? How about all-pervasive? That will convey it in English. It's all-pervasive. I could say it's got movement, you see, but then maybe it breaks into motion. That confuses me. But if I say it's all-pervasive, that means it's inseparable. That means it's indivisible. That means it doesn't have many parts. Oh, if it did, it would be dual. It would be duality that I'm worshipping, you see. So I'm not worshipping duality. That's just a stage. I'm working my way up to the highest knowers of the truth and familiarizing myself in this lifetime with what Jesus knew, what Buddha knew, what Vasishtha knew, what Krishna knew. And I'm getting a wisdom transmission of that from those teachers who follow such great souls. Without any qualms whatsoever, I give myself completely to those souls. I make a complete offering of myself to my Guru, who is a huge wave of Shakti coming off the ocean of Brahman, whose Leela, whose sport, floods the being with healing, who is the greatest healer in all the worlds. You see, that's how Vivekananda wrote it in his hymn Achanjal. I could sing it for you. I make a complete offering of myself to my Guru, to Sri Ramakrishna, his Guru. See, wow, you had a Guru like that? He started at the top, brother.
Mm.
So, samsara, that might have been a good place to even start this chart, but we pretty much took the trip of karma, bhakti, and raja. But now let's take the trip of jnana, that is neti neti. You can see here this pathway going along this slope. And the quote by, guess who? Gaudapada's student, Shankar. He says, "They alone are qualified to seek Brahman who attain viveka, discrimination between the real and the unreal." Then that's your qualification, you see. It's sort of like, this is your qualification for the non-touch yoga, you see. These are things you're going to have as prerequisites in order for you to attain non-touch yoga. These have to be all in place. So Shankara puts it in that way. If you're going to practice the path of not this, and weed the garden, then you're going to have to weed the garden of the thought, I'm a body. You're going to have to weed the garden of the thought, I am my five senses. You're going to have to weed the garden of the thought, I am the objects of the senses. And I am the dream state, and I am the deep sleep state, and I am my mind, and I am my intelligence, and I am my thoughts. All of those have to be taken away, dispatched. Christ said, "Get thee behind me." They're all devilish in nature because they don't hold the non-dual truth. They cannot measure up. And often they take me in the opposite direction. My ego, my thoughts, my intelligence, they take me in the opposite direction. I mean, think of the intelligent people who are running down a backwards path. Very smart. Whoa, they run circles around you intellectually. But do they know the simple truth? Do they have any inkling of it? Are they even attracted to it once they hear it? Or are they just outright antagonistic of it? Stubborn. It's my knowledge, this little area of knowledge that the intellect owns, you see. There's a difference between the intellect and the intelligence. Intellect is a sheath, a holder, and intelligence is that which infills it. So if you take the intellect and you expand it, it can contain more. People went to Sri Ramakrishna and said, "You know so much, and you're illiterate. You see, but you know so much. Where does all this come from?" "From Mother," he says. He said, "Well, I have just such a small mind, I can't hold it, what you're saying." He said, "Well, just imagine your mind's a cup, and you take it to a glass blower. You see, and then he heats it up and expands it, pulls it, and now it can hold more. So don't limit yourself to, my mind is just a little tiny container. Take it to the Guru. Let him expand it. Sit there for hours and listen to him. What you're doing right now with me, I did with my teacher for hours. And I was completely, 100% focused on him. I never once moved or even breathed, hardly. See?
Mm-hmm.
And he repeated things over and over again, too. And those I knew, you see. I accepted everything he said. And then when he started saying things he hadn't said before, then I was there for them. I didn't miss a word that fell off of his divine lips up until the time when he passed away in his mid-90s. So I was there, you see, 100%. And so that's what's been happening with beings. They gain the truth, and the truth sets them free, and then they pass it on, you see. And as far as Vivekananda is concerned, that's the best thing you can do for anyone. You feed them, they just get hungry again. Give them that knowledge which puts hunger and thirst to death. Why did Vivekananda sit in the Himalayas and doesn't have to eat? If I have diabetes, well, I guess I won't eat, then my blood sugar won't get high. He can fast for days. Some of those direct disciples of Ramakrishna walked around in the Himalayas in the winter without shoes. Imagine that. Swami Abhedananda was one of those. Extreme titiksha. Titiksha means forbearance of hot and cold. Extreme titiksha is like they weren't even in the body. The consciousness was just like guiding the body around like it was a marionette at the end of strings. You see, sleep there overnight in the snow, wake up in the snow. Temperature falls below zero. Some of the later apostles of the direct apostles said to them, we want to be like you, we want to do these great austerities you did. And they said, no, you don't, we ruined our health doing that. But they didn't care about the body. We have to understand that there are some beings that only care about the soul. They can take on as many bodies as they want. Why should they worry about this one? You've had hundreds of wives, hundreds of children, hundreds of husbands and so forth. Why are you worried about this one? Passes, another takes its place. You pass, another takes its place. Well, that's what's going on in samsara all the time. That's why Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree for 49 days and said, enough of this, I'm going to find a way off the wheel of time. And he had what was called nirvana. And talk about non-touch and non-speak. He could not speak after he came out of nirvana. Had nothing to say. And they coerced him. They tried to get him. It was people who had followed him before he took his new path came back and saw this light shining in him. What did you experience? What's changed you so much? Finally, he came down out of that non-dual samadhi and began to speak. And then Buddhism had its real start, you see, 550 years prior to Christ. Buddha is definitely the competitor for the throne of our heart with his great compassion. But if you want to know the real truth, there's no difference between Buddha and Christ. It's just one avatar, and it comes many times in different forms. That follows the Advaitic reasoning, doesn't it? The soul is one. It's not. It can't be divided. Didn't we already say that? So what is this Jesus, Buddha, Krishna nonsense? See? And the different religions. Ramakrishna used to say these divisions that we're calling Islam and India and Vedanta and so forth, those are names. We should get rid of them. They're divisions. They keep people separate. They keep the truth divided. Now there's a radical person, you see. He can only say that because he's living in that state. Imagine the breakdown of systems like that, what havoc it would cause in the world. He doesn't care because the world's not real. He's known it to be unreal. He loved his birth village, Kamarpakur. I've taken you, some of you, there to Kamarpakur. He loved that village. But he said later to his brother or to his nephew, Ramlal, I really loved Kamarpakur, but if I had have known it was real, I would have covered it in gold. But I saw that it was unreal. Parents, children, huts, villages. I saw it was unreal, so I gave it up. That's the avatar. I'm not going to become attached to anything. It's going to remain ever free, never bound. Can you do that? Can you give it up on the spot? The rich man couldn't when Christ asked him to. And the rich man, that particular rich man, was hearing the truth in Christ's teachings. He said, can I follow you? Go away and give up your riches, come back, and then you can follow me. He was just telling the truth. He wasn't putting him to a test. He knew that, like Ramakrishna was to say 2,000 years later, that if you keep something near a mirror, it reflects in it. That's Ramakrishna's way of saying if you keep wealth near you, it's always in your mind. Fine, we put it in a bank, and then hopefully we don't think about it. But then if you wake up every day thinking about how much money you have in the bank, and you get into numbers and accounting and all that, taxes and everything, then there it is, all the dividing power again. Maya is just seeping into the cracks in your thinking consciousness, in your sleeping consciousness, in your waking consciousness. It's just all feeding on delusion. The non-truth, the unreal. Big feast on emptiness. It's sort of like having cotton candy for dinner. This is nutritious, ain't it? This is really going to sustain me. You see? Well, that's what taking the offerings of the world to be real is like. It's like eating cotton candy. Sri Ramakrishna said there's this fruit called the hog plum in India. And it's all pit and skin and very, very little flesh. If you can manage to get the skin apart from the flesh and take the pit out and eat the flesh, it gives you indigestion. And what did he call that? That's the world. The hog plum to him is the world. He said it. He said, the hog plum, that's like the world. What little substance you can get out of it makes you sick. Why are people so attached to it? He couldn't understand it. This is a person that's just beyond our understanding. He's having samadhi all the time. He has a loincloth and he sits around. Why is he so happy then? Rich people used to go to him and say, how can I have that kind of happiness, you see? It's just like they went to Christ. One person once gave him 1,000,000 rupees. He said, I want to put 1,000,000 rupees in a bank account for you. And the master fainted. And when he came to, he said, don't ever say that to me again. Dare you take away my freedom? The implication was, how dare you take away my freedom? Think I gave it all up just to take it back? Like he said, licking up the spittle I spat out on the sidewalk a few minutes ago. Would anyone do that? See? So if you give up the world, you realize to be unreal. Are you going to take it back later? After you've learned this? After you've experienced bliss? After you've come to know that happiness is an illusion? Because it's always followed by unhappiness? Pain is followed by pleasure. Pleasure is followed by pain. This is a round you're going through, you see. And Buddha wanted off it. Christ got off it. So, if you take the Neti-Neti path then, you must come to Viveka, and that's why Swamiji named himself Vivekananda. When he was in India, he called himself Satchidananda. And when he knew he was going to the West, he changed his name, Swami Vivekananda, the bliss of discrimination between the real and the unreal, because he was going right into the land of the malechus, you see, right into the land of the materialists, the sensualists, the hedonists, the intelligent scientists, which he was very much into. He loved the advances of the Western nation. He wasn't hypercritical of us. But he tried to teach us the spiritual truth. And then he said, he saw we wouldn't take to it. He said, oh, I see you're like straw on fire. Really interested at first, and then you can't hold it. It's burn out. Psst. See? But a few stayed with him. Like Nivedita was one. Of course, she was English. He used to say, the Americans are like straw on fire, but if you get an Englishman on your side, you'll stay there forever. The British, they'd conquered the world, you see. Gandhi had actually put them back at one time. So, and another Indian coming amongst them, you see how the whole thing was set up, how Mother sets things up. One one Hindu man, manages to put you off your power of domination and sets you up for the next Indian man to come and teach you the truth now that your ego has been diminished. See? So the arrogant American has to bow. What do we have in America that's more than 200 years old? We don't even have our own music, our own art. We don't have a non-dual philosophy. I'm a musician, and I'm sorry I don't call Gershwin music. I call Brahms music. I call Stravinsky music. I call the Europeans music. See, that has 2,000 years to mature. What do we have in America? that we're so arrogant about? Wealth? Opulence? Rome had that. Greece had that. What happened to them? What happened to Rome and Greece was a philosophy came out of them. That's what happened. That was the cutting edge of things. All that suffering, all that killing, all that war, all that ideology, all that cosmology, the gods and the goddesses, all of that, what actually came out of that was philosophy. There's nothing better in the world than philosophy. This is true philosophy. It's better than religion. But it's not quite as good as spirituality. Through spirituality, through philosophy, you will get to spirituality. And you can see why when you hear Gaudapada teach like this. See, I'm taking on Gaudapada right now in this day and age, and I'm trying to communicate to you a little of what is in his Karika, the scriptures that I've studied and that my teachers talked about and that I've learned from him, you see, and from my own meditations. This is Jnana Agni Danena has opened my third eye and set me on fire. I want to burn out. I don't want to rust out. To quote Vivekananda. Or I will wear out instead of rust out, I think he said. So that fire of yoga was his, you see. Always keeping him on the cutting edge of things. Non-dual realization. I mean, we sing songs about him because of that, the beautiful soul that came to us. Harinjas chestitai kalagyo gayanai parigyanar buddho maharshi darshanai Yachindro Shakti Bir Bhavanyam Nastikim Viveka Nandate Prabhati Pranjali Narendra Shashave Narendra Yovane Narendra Kridane Narendra Shikshane Narendra Palane, Narendra Harpane, Vivekanandate, Prabhati Pranjali. That one verse out of all these verses says, Hail to Vivekananda, who all excellences abide in thee. Your heroic actions remind us of Hanuman. Your unrivaled detachment marks you as a supreme renunciate. Your music and poetry blend artistry with heartfelt devotion. Your infinite wisdom reflects the state of a Vijnani, the highest wisdom knower. Profound inner visions mark you as a great rishi. In this auspicious dawn of illumination, O Vivekananda, we offer you our heartfelt salutations. So, all those things in a verse by the Swami Arshananda, you see. All those things. He was a great rishi, he was a great Vijnani, he was a great renunciate, he was a great poet and musician. On and on, you see, the qualities rained out of him. So, many songs written about him. Beautiful in content, very poetic and very convincing. So he named himself after Viveka, this discrimination between the real and the unreal, the separation of the wheat from the chaff, if you want to put it simply. Now, up that precipitous path then of Neti Neti, you see, formless samadhi awaits, the abode of inaction. Shiva, Shiva, you see that, where Shiva dwells in inaction, perfect stability. And on the way to the formless God, you see, is that path. They have that in mind, that reality has been described to me as formless with a capital F. because formless with a lowercase f means unmanifested nature. There's form, which is here, all around us. And then there's the next degree of form, which is like your deep sleep state, you see, and dreaming. That's a subtle form, right? The very tree that you're looking at will be in your dream tonight as a thought tree. So you have an outer and an inner world going on here. A gross and a subtle world. Stula and sukshma, they call it. And then you have deep sleep, where nobody takes their ego. You see, you don't take their form there. It's called unmanifested property. It's where nature went into formless state. So I don't want that. I only want to know that there is form and formlessness here. But what I really want to know is that extreme formlessness, that non-dual formlessness, that Brahman, that's beyond form and formlessness. See where it comes from, that idea? Brahman is beyond both form and formlessness. It's not just about gods and goddesses, and people, or the void, and then filling the void. See? It's beyond both form and formlessness. Yes, God has form, then he has none. Do you know what it's like? It's like icebergs melting in an ocean, forming because of people wanting to see God in form. The devotees want to see God in form. And then the sun of wisdom rises and he melts. All in the same ocean. So, beholding that, one becomes an adherent of the untouched yoga, the non-touched yoga. And so that path of neti neti is the way in which very, very intrepid souls will follow. It's enjoined upon us as Westerners to follow it. Some of us. Probably not the householders. They won't make the best renunciates. They have to do it a different way. But there are some of us, forest dwellers, some of us, no children, some of us, no land, some of us, and so forth and so on, or even some of us that have the wherewithal inside us to feel that God is formless, and we can take a path that strips everything away from that vision. We're strong enough to do that. And we won't stop until that goal is reached. Swamiji used to wake you up with that, literally from sleep. If you were at one of his retreats, he'd come in the door, and early in the morning, you see, and he'd say, "Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached." And he meant that supreme goal that Buddha talked about, Paragatam. And he'd feed you some chilies, you see, and watches you. Come back later and say, "How's your boiler doing?" He was a good jokester too. If you were not a student, he was very kind to you. If you were a student, he was very hard on you. Take you to task. Burn away lifetimes of karma and a few scoldings, see. So, viveka, that's a very important word here. And we see how it takes us up and above and beyond. Now, I told you we would look at this great discovery, he called it. There he is in one of our favorite pictures of him in the West with that beautiful garment that he had made for himself. It's sort of a combination of Muslim, Christian, and Hindu. Got the Nehru collar and so forth. When he had the Belar Mat temple made for Ramakrishna, he made it a combination of those three religions. It's got the architecture in it that smacks of all three of those religions. So he was very much of an integrator in his thinking, very, very advanced. And so even the clothing he would design would be like that. You see, I want to look like the Christian preacher, I want to have the Hindu Nehru collar, and I want to have that dark Muslim, that cloth, and shaped in such a way that I can be a sannyasin and I can go about preaching the Vedanta, you see. So that's a beautiful picture of him then. But he often said about his great discovery here, I will now tell you my discovery. All religion is contained in the Vedanta, that is, in the three stages of Vedantic philosophy, the Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Advaita. That is, dualism, which is usually attributed to Madhva, qualified non-dual, that's usually attributed to Ramanuj, and Advaita, which is of this line we're talking about, Gaudapada and Shankara. We shouldn't forget, between Gaudapada and Shankara, there was a soul named Govindapada. It was the student of Gaudapada, and then Shankara became the student of Govindapada. So those three are pointed out. The distinguishing facet about Govindapada is that he was supposed to have been an incarnation of the father of yoga, Patanjali. So some 500 years or so later, you see, there he appeared. And so that's a known fact in India, but we hardly ever hear about it outside of India. That is why Shankara did a great commentary on the eight-limbed yoga. I'm using it a lot in my email courses to you, those of you who are following that. We're on lesson 82 now. Some people are still joining in and starting with lesson 1 and trying to catch up. It's a big philosophical cycle, so don't worry. You're not behind nor you're ahead. Sri Krishna said, if you watch a race, a foot race, around the track, you see people start off and the best runner gets ahead, right? He leaves the pack behind. And you just start talking with your friend for a few seconds, and the runner gets so far ahead that he ends up in the back of the pack. And you look back and you say, he's now behind everyone. See? So there's no getting ahead and there's no getting behind in Advaita Vedanta. There's just opening up to what is, and that is your own property already. And that's your own property because you don't need to own it. You don't need to touch it because you can't touch it. It's non-touch. Everything is within you. The kingdoms of heaven are within you. You don't need to go looking for them. It's basically the implication of Viveka. Why did I have to initiate Viveka, discrimination between the real and the unreal? Because I fell into the spell of Maya and I thought that the unreal was the real. And then I forgot about the real. It's that simple. I'm taking wooden nickels now. I may as well set up a stand. Anyone got any wooden nickels? I'm a fool. Come on. So this khyati, this clarity, this waking up is ennobling. Vivekananda said, it's my man-making policy now, from now on, is to give people this truth and watch them wake up. Give it to them first, let them put it in their wearing cloth, and then go out into life. If you don't give it to them, they go out into life, much greater risk, that they will never hear it. So give them this non-dual philosophy first, and then let them fall into qualified non-dualistic way of thinking or dualistic way of thinking. That one truth you planted in them will stand them instead forevermore. They will never forget that. That's like a drop of acid you put in there. And he used to say, I can liken non-dual truth to the most corrosive substance in existence. It burns through everything. Soft things quickly, hard things a little longer, but it will burn through everything. So, non-dual truth, the most corrosive substance in the world, it burns through those subtle things in the mind and makes a goddess out of a woman and a god out of a man, he said. And they return to their divine nature, which they never should have left in the first place, and actually which they never did leave in the first place. They were always that. That thou art. You cannot be other than your true nature. You can, as the song says, you can trade in your true nature for a world of colored glass, baubles, marbles, you see. So that was a big error the soul made, trading its non-dual nature for a false world. So these three stages of philosophy, let's take these from lower to higher. Dvaita of Madhva. In dualism in India, I've often said, it's different than dualism here. It's very hard to find a true dualism in America. The dualism you find is science and theology at loggerheads. That's the dualism you find. If you look into religion, Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity, you find a lot to be desired, as they say. There's a lot of untenable tenets that are there that you can't accept if you're looking for higher truth. Eternal hell and fire and damnation, the seven-day creation theory. Again, if you take them symbolically, okay, there's some room there. But literally, you're looking for something that's of an eternal nature. So fundamentalist religion, that's why people are leaving it, like rats leaving a sinking ship. It's not doing any good. It's not making any transformation in our consciousness that we're looking for. Our minds are not getting purified by it. In fact, we're falling into guilt and shame and idea of being sinners and things that Sri Ramakrishna said you should never fall into. You should never speak of sin, Ramakrishna said. You should only tell a person of their divine nature and then let them measure up to it. That's telling them the non-dual truth, isn't it? So, if you looked at true dualism, it's very rich. India has true dualism. Here's what Madhva says. God is distinct from individual souls. Now, after hearing Gaudapada teach, you're going to question that. Well, I thought the soul and God are one. So here's dualism as Madhva says it. God is distinct from non-living matter. An individual soul is distinct from every other soul. Souls are distinct from matter. Parts of matter are distinct from one another. So there's a lot of separation here. But the most important points to look into are this idea that God is distinct from individual souls. God is there and I am here and never the twain shall meet. However, the redeeming part of duality in India is that God exists. You're not going to find that, say, in science. In atheism, agnosticism, and so forth. Materialism, there's no God. It's just out of the picture. You're stupid to think so. See, it's all mechanics. It's all nature. It's all matter. So, the redeeming part there about Madhva and his philosophy, he also makes a very astute distinction. God is distinct from non-living matter. So basically, Purusha and Prakriti are different. That is, the soul is sentient and nature is insentient. I said that a few weeks ago at a non-thought church, and someone said, he said that nature was insentient. So there's a lot of people still that don't understand that. They think that nature is living. But it's only living in the state that it is living because it came out of you. It's invested with your consciousness. The thought tree came out of you, out of your thinking. The thought cup, the thought iPad, the thought tuner, the thought cloth, they all came out of my thinking process. That's where they came from. They're a thought. And the thought got materialized. This is just thought made manifest. My thought solidified in an object. It's not created, it's projected. If it were created, then it would have had to have been uncreated before it was created, right? And so if it's uncreated, then it must mean it's not produced, ever. You took it from its nature and you made it produced. See? It doesn't make sense, does it? If a thing is unproduced in its nature, it cannot change its nature. So when you produced it, you pulled it from its unproduced nature. So that's a machination. That's a fallacy. I took something, say with the power of my mind coupled with Maya, and I made it look like it was separate from its source. Bad philosophical error, you see. Now I'm living in that separation. All of us are. You know, we're saying this world was created in 7 days, or we're saying it took 4 billion years to create it. It's gone when you go into sleep tonight. It's gone when you go to death. Every one of us. And you bring it back when you wake up and when you're reborn. There and gone. Constantly. And don't get caught up in that particular problem, because you have to look beyond that to the non-origination idea. It's there and gone because there's a substratum that it's coming off of. Waves are there and gone because there's an ocean behind them. Souls or people, worlds are there because there's a substratum behind it. It couldn't make sense any other way. Where did they come from? So this is the Gaudapada's thinking about aparinama and ajativada. Non-origination, non-production. You cannot produce a thing its nature is unproduced. So when you produce it, you've taken it away from its nature. Very solid thinking. Be very hard for anyone to argue with Gaudapada and Shankara. Nobody has really won that argument. That's why Vivekananda said, Advaita Vedanta will become the future religion of humanity. There's no doubt about that. This will win. This will cut through. This is the bit of acid we need to realize that we're not forms reincarnating again and again, but we are the ocean. Waves come and go, the ocean stays. We are that ocean of consciousness. We should live as we are, in that way. Now, let's read his quote here for greater clarity. The proposition upon which Madhva bases his realism is that both the knower and the object of knowledge must be real, for otherwise knowledge would not be possible. The object of knowledge then has a reality all its own. The world is real because it is perceived as such. The fact that an object is fleeting and subject to change does not mean it is unreal. As for souls, all are distinct from one another and are distinct from God as well, though they have dependent existence upon him. To Madhva, all souls born into the world are in a state of bondage, but by continued struggle through many lifetimes, they get released from this bondage, and release can be gained. He's really thinking along the lines of a lot of this, isn't he? You must, in order to get free, you must struggle. How can you argue? But what's not being said there is that you're already free to begin with. That's what's missing. That's what's not quite satisfying. Something's not quite right for a person who's arrived at a non-dual standpoint. So that's why argumentation in India was never really the thing. If it did become the thing, it was a matter of little minds. In other words, Indian philosophers never argued whether God existed or not. They just stated God is existence. That was their point. If you argue whether it exists or not, you're going back and forth for thousands of years, called debate and so forth. You're not getting anywhere. Nobody's agreeing with anyone. But there's one thing that can make everyone agree. God is existence. Or just put it this way, existence is. Can you stand in front of me and say I don't exist? Well, this is part of Madhva's thinking, you see. The world is real because it's perceived as being real. We have made it real. So that's the positive side of duality. See? If we decide to make it unreal, that would be a turn toward the Advaitic, wouldn't it? That is, God is real, the world is real, the souls are real, and they have a relationship. That's what Madhva is saying. He's not going to be ready to advise or admit the non-dual essence of God and mankind yet. That mankind is just God walking around on two legs. That's how the Advaita thinks. Let's go to Vishishtadvaita. Vishishta Ramanuja, that is, puts it in these terms. The supporter and the supported, the controller and the controlled, the Lord and his servant. That's how he's thinking about it. In order to make this more clarity in Christian terms, you could say that a dualist would say, you tell a dualist, pray to your Father in heaven. That's what Christ told the dualist. Pray to your Father in heaven. But when he came upon somebody who was thinking in higher terms, he would say, I'm the vine and you're the branches. So you have a connection to God through me, the Savior. That's qualified non-dualism. Pray to your Father in heaven is dualism. I'm different from God, so I have to pray to him. That's a lower step. A higher step is, now I have a connection to God through an illumined soul. I'm the vine, you're the branches. Now he's speaking to a person with greater intelligence. But when he said, I and my Father are one, and he only told that to some of the apostles, and they couldn't really understand it at first, he was talking Advaita. I and my Father are one. It's just like saying, thou art that in India, which was many thousand years prior to Christ stating that. So that's how you would put it in Christian speak. There's I pray to your Father in heaven, I am the vine, and he's the vine and I'm the branch, and then I and my Father are one. It goes perfectly with these three stages. So when Vivekananda looked into this, he said, that's my discovery. These are not antagonistic of one another, they're not in competition with one another, they're to be all looked at as steps, stepping stones. But there's no doubt in his mind that I and my Father are one. And that's what Gaudapada is talking about in non-touch yoga. He's not going to accept any arguments. It's proven philosophically that that's the case. Sorry, you cannot divide the indivisible reality. If you do, it only is apparently divided. Like we are apparently divided. We're all one soul, but here we are in different bodies. But there's a pearl, there's a pearl, there's a pearl, here's a pearl. But there's a string connecting us all together, right? Consciousness, it's called. Our awareness. It's undeniable. We're operating by it. You know, the fish got together under the sea and they began to argue if water existed or not. See? It's like that. Consciousness is the very element in which we're living, and we can't see it. That's what animates our senses. That's what I was just singing. It's what makes the eyes see, what makes the ears hear, what makes words have meaning. That's all mother wisdom, you see. There's no denying it, is there? Else you're denying your own existence. This doesn't make sense. So what makes the most sense then is Advaita, but let's read his quote here. According to Ramanuja, that is Sri Ramakrishna's quote about Ramanuja, according to Ramanuja, God is qualified by the universe and its living beings. These three, Brahman, the world, and individual souls, together constitute one. It is like the case of a bell fruit, whose flesh, shell, and seeds make up the fruit itself. At first one may think that the real thing is the flesh of the fruit only. But to get the full weight of the fruit, one must weigh the shell, the seeds as well. Likewise in spiritual discrimination, that's viveka, one must at first separate the unreal from the real to find out the essence. Then alone will one be able to see his essence everywhere, like in the world of living beings. Thus one soon realizes, as with the bell fruit, that the reality from which we derive the notion of Brahman is the very reality that evolves the idea of living beings in the universe. So, a good paragraph to sit with for a while and study, but he gives you a little metaphor in there that's very helpful. The bell fruit, its seed and its flesh. If you want the full weight, you want to weigh all three of those. No doubt the flesh is the essence, and the fruit seller will sell just that, and he'll toss the seeds in the shell back for the cows to eat in the back of the stall, you see. But the flesh is the essence. That's non-dual realities. You can see how this is beginning to connect on a very deep level, and how when you teach, when I teach, when Ramakrishna taught, he had to come to this level. You can't teach from here, see, because there's no teacher and student there. There's no knowledge and knower there. So we all have to come down to qualified non-dualistic level in order to explain these truths. So he's hoping that we take this step in the West and we become qualified non-dualists. That doesn't mean we're going to give up Madhva, because he has plenty of ideas like distinguishing ourselves from matter is one of them. And we're also not going to give up the push to reach the highest peak of non-dual realization. That's the goal, the supreme goal. But this is the connecting part. We're going to get to the Father through the Son. So we're going to be a branch off of that vine, and that's our connecting point. So very important to understand Ramanuja's philosophy. That's a great step. Now there's the Advaita in all its glory on top. Some declarations of Advaita Vedanta are this: God and mankind are one inseparable entity, non-different from one another. Nothing unclear about that. I don't, really not a lot to say about it again. God and mankind are one inseparable entity. If you're seeing separation, then Maya has gotten a hold of you. All beings, all things are non-originated free of birth and death. The great contribution of Gaudapada. All things, nature, objects, souls, Brahman, all unoriginated. They do not have a beginning. Give up thinking about terms of when everything started. A circle doesn't have a beginning. A cycle never ends for those who are on the cycle. They have to get off. Which is why Buddha said, get out of the river. I got out and sat in the banks. First I was in the river and I was seeing everything go around, and I wasn't seeing those things that were behind me and in front of me. I wasn't seeing the past, I wasn't seeing the future, I wasn't seeing my past lifetimes, I wasn't seeing my future lifetimes. Then I got off of the river and sat on the banks and I saw everything go by and I saw it was all connected. It's one of his later teachings about everything returns, was the conclusion of that. Everything returns. So if you don't like that, get off the cycle before you lose your lunch. Man's nature is divine. Impure mind superimposes ignorance. There are 11 of these. I took these 3 because of space on an 8x11. But these 3 seem to be sort of the definitive markings of Advaita Vedanta. They're all beautiful. See how they grab your attention right away, whereas these, they don't grab my attention that much. Maybe that's because I'm a confirmed non-dualist, and my teacher was a non-dualist, and my teacher's teacher was a non-dualist. And her husband was also a non-dualist. See? But this is where I vibrate. These things make sense to me. God and mankind are one inseparable entity. All beings, all things are non-originated, free of birth and death, and man's nature is divine. That was his great message when he came here. I want to bring the Advaita Vedanta to the Western people and tell them that God, man is just God walking around on 2 legs, that their nature is not sinful, their nature is divine. And how many people responded to that? They all stood up in a huge ovation at the Parliament of Religions when he started to speak. There was no other reaction to any other philosophy or religion like that. He hardly got 5 words out of his mouth. And people stood up clapping. They were waiting for that kind of message to come. I belong to the oldest order of renunciates in the world, he told them, called the Sannyasin. They were waiting for a Sannyasin to come from the East and tell them these things. It's all on historical record. 1893, Chicago, Parliament of Religions. He was the harbinger of Advaita Vedanta here. But you can see his great discovery, how he doesn't burn bridges. There are steps, stepping stones. And once you realize this, these 2 might not be as interesting to you, but it doesn't mean you can't use them to get back across the river. Stepping stone is very handy that way. You come down and talk to the qualified non-dualists, and you come down and talk to the dualists right on their level, because there's plenty to talk about there. It's just that ignorance has gone away, see. And now I'm free. And I want everyone to be free, like the air you breathe. That's a quote from him. All right, we are 5 more minutes, so let's finish this with this quote by Sri Ramakrishna. The followers of Advaita constantly discriminate, saying Brahman alone is real, the world is illusory. Their aim is to attain nirvana. This is called self-knowledge, discussed in the Ashtavakra Samhita. That was the book he made Vivekananda read when he was young. It is an experience beyond the reach of ordinary men. The followers of this school, who are non-dualists, say, Soham, I am the Supreme Self. Soham. This real self is unattached, impervious to duality, whereas the ego self suffers them. If one burns wood, some ash results, but if one burns camphor, nothing remains. All the 6 darshanas, philosophies of India, are contained in the Advaita. That means yoga is in the Vedanta, Samkhya is in the Vedanta, and so forth. All the 6 darshanas, the main philosophies, are contained in the Advaita. So again, he gives us amidst this philosophical speak that he's engaged in. He gives us a simple example of ash. You can burn wood and ash will result. Burn camphor, no residue, you see. And that gives us the idea of this non-touch yoga. No residue to touch anymore. See? You're lucky if you can catch a whiff of it, even a whiff of it, you see. It's non-smell. It's non-hear. See? Pretty soon, the words of your teacher will just disappear because you've gone into realization you don't need words anymore. But the words will lead you there. So you can't dispense with them. They're indispensable. Well, I hope this fourth installment of the class on Advaita Yoga, Advaita Vedanta, non-touch yoga, Sparsha Yoga, has been helpful, along with the 3 preceding classes. There'll be a final one next week in the same place, same time, and we'll bring this series to a close. And then we'll go in October to worship Divine Mother on the mainland at our 2 ashrams in California and in Oregon with Durga Puja, it's called, in a beautiful mother retreat up the Columbia River Gorge off the Wind River. All of that is coming, and then we return, and I'm here actually for a nice long time after that. October, I come back 1st of November. We're here November, December, and half of January, so we have a good 5 or 6 classes we can do in that period. We can settle in and study deeply in these wonderful perennial wisdom teachings. So here, let's end with a chant. Om Bhadram, Om Bhadram, Karnibhihi Shrinayamadevaha, Bhadram Pasyema Akshabhirya Jatraha, Stirai Rangayish Tushtuvam Sastanavir, Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuhu, Swasti na Indra Vrida Shravaha, Swasti na Pusha Vishwadevaha, Swasti na Starksho Arishtanemihi, Swasti no Brihaspatir Dadatu, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we hear with these ears what is good and spiritual. May we see with these eyes what is noble and uplifting. And may we, while worshiping the Lord and Mother of the universe, with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us and may peace be unto all. Om Hari